Welcome to the Journos. I'm Peter Martin. I'm delighted to say that joining me in the studio today, Hugh McDonald, Alison McConnell and David McCarthy. It's like reuniting with an old mucker from
very old mucker.
I know. What you don't realise, Hugh and Alison, is David and I started out many years ago. I was at Radio 4 and you were the evening news correspondent.
That's absolutely right, early 90s.
Yep, fantastic, and always helped because you get to call them and say, have you got anything that I haven't got?
And the answer was always no.
Exactly. Following Hearts, Hibs, Wraith Rovers and Dunfermline. Happy days. Great to have you with us, David. Of course, the great thing about the Journos is when you've got a topic like I've thrown out to you guys, it's one that we can have a right good argument about. Sometimes the journals will talk about issues that are domestic or European or globally, something that FIFA is dealing with. But I thought we'd stick to today the greatest teams of the last 40 or so years, from about 1975 onwards with the arrival of the Premier League as it was, and it's changed over the years. Everybody knows the great teams of Rangers 72, Celtic 67, even, as you'll know, Hugh, Rangers reaching the Cup Winners' Cup final in 67, in that same year that Celtic. So Scottish football was really strong. You had great Dundee and you had great Kilmarnock sides and Dunfermline. But from 75 onwards, we still had lots of Scottish players to choose from. They were qualifying for World Cup. So I thought, let's get our teeth into some of the teams that we think are worthy of a mention to see if we can pick a greatest one. I'm not sure we'll get there, but there's certainly a great argument for it. So I thought we'd start with Rangers. Can I throw out to you, first of all, the Rangers 92-93 team is certainly a candidate. And the reason for that is it's the first year of the Champions League. Mm-hmm. It's that new format. It was a format that probably with just those two groups gave you an opportunity to reach a Champions League final. And, for many in our very divided country, the truth of the matter was if Rangers knock out Marseille, they're in the Champions League final.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, there's been so many stories about some kind of nefarious behaviour by Marseille to ensure that Rangers didn't get there. Mark Hateley insists to this day that the referee was nobbled, and Rangers didn't get there and Marseille did go into the final.
Yeah, I mean, again, we're always mega careful legally on certain things, but I look at that Rangers team, and if I was a Rangers player from that era, Hugh, looking at Bernard Tapie and that Marseille,
and don't have to be too. Trust me, we don't have to be too worried about Bernard Tapie. No, Bernard Tapie's been done.
Yeah,
it's not the alleged accused.
But it's amazing. It's a sliding doors moment, which is so. It must be so painful for some of the Rangers players who, could have been in a Champions League final. You never know what could have happened.
Absolutely. And that Rangers team, the thing about that Rangers team that year, and I'm probably jumping ahead if we were discussing picking individuals for the greatest team, the goalkeeper, to me, is a certainty for that. Because in that season, and I think the season afterwards, he was a very, very good goalkeeper for a long time. But that season, the season afterwards, I think he was like Superman. He was absurdly good.
Yeah.
He was like laughably good. Like I remember, Ali and my son and I, one of his first Scotland games was at Ibrox, and Goram was playing in goals, and Paulo Futre for Portugal was 1-on-1, and we were behind the goal in the Copland Street end and looking down at him, Copland Road end, and looking down at him. And nobody in the crowd was bothered. They were just going like, there was only
he'll save it.
And he actually just, when he was through, he kind of booted it away. He didn't even deign to dive for the shot. I mean, Goram was sensational for the Leeds United performance.
Yeah.
Home and away, for example.
Absolutely.
There's a few players in that team that were in their absolute prime just at that point. Hateley as well. That season was outstanding.
I mean, the team that I've put down there, and there are subs that come in and out.
Of course.
And of course, the other thing that I think, many people would complain about nowadays, But at that time, you were looking and wondering if any Scottish player was going to get in the team. They had a 3-4 rule at one point as well. In this team, though, you had Goram in goal. I think Neil Murray was, one of those ones that's no harm to Neil. He would have probably looked and thought, well, I'll get in through somebody either injured or through the necessity. There was nobody else available. Murray, Robertson, David Robertson, Gough, McPherson, John Brown, Trevor Steven, Stuart McCall, Ian Durrant, Hateley and Mikhaylichenko. Now, if you even look at them as individuals, but collectively as a team, as you say, again, you come up against the likes of a Leeds United. I mean, everybody was talking about Leeds as if, as ever, Scotland against England's a no-brainer. Leeds will take them.
Yeah.
Not that team.
No, absolutely not. And, there's some absolutely top-class players in there. There's one or two that wouldn't get anywhere near a kind of Rangers' greatest 11 in even a conversation, I mean, like Big Dave McPherson was a smashing player, really, really good player. But it wouldn't be in the conversation for a greatest ever Rangers team. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But when you've got the likes of Gough and John Brown, I mean, they were cornerstones for the best part of a decade. And, you're not really going to get an awful lot better than that mentality-wise, I think, as well as ability-wise. There's a lot of players in there that you would want in the trenches with you every day of the week. Yeah,
John Brown was one of the most underrated players for me. I mean, I think rather unkindly from some quarters, it was almost as if he was portrayed as this enforcer.
Yeah.
He was a good footballer.
He was an enforcer as well, though. Yeah. That's what made him. He could play both sides of the game. I mean, the signing for Rangers was but one of the reasons that certainly precipitated the signing for Rangers was his tackling in a head-to-head with Souness in a match, and Souness said, and they fell out badly during the match, and Souness said, "I like the cut of this guy's jib," and
he's just cemented me
because he could do that. But there's players who get reputations. I think most famously, I would say, would be John Greig. John Greig, if you bring up John Greig in conversation now with everybody, would say, he put the boot in and it was all about spirit and it was always a leader and all that. John Greig was a very good football player.
Yeah.
And John Brown was the same. I mean, John Greig could play inside forward. People forget that. And John Brown was a very good football player as well.
I don't remember John Brown ever playing for Scotland. Did he?
No, neither did I.
So again, you would have a conversation, it's a completely different conversation about some of the best uncapped players, because I always remember I was a massive Bobby Russell fan growing up. Bobby Russell never played for Scotland and I could never believe why. But when you look at the Scotland teams in the late 70s and the midfield players that they had to choose from, maybe that was why. But I think John Brown would be in any conversation about, the best uncapped Scottish players.
And strangely enough, Alison, when we talk about individual players, there is if I mention the name Ian Durrant to anybody, they go, is it pre-Ian Durrant the tackle? Is it post-Ian Durrant?
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt. That injury came at a point when we were nowhere near where we are now today with the progressions in sports science and rehabilitation. You think that injury he was never the same player after it, which was a great shame when you saw the undoubted potential that he had. He still went on, he went on, came back and played, but I don't think there was any doubt that that's a sliding doors moment in his career. We didn't have the same education or infrastructure around that type of injury when you go back, 40 years or so.
When you see how good a player Durrant still was after the injury, it's frightening what he could have been.
Because he won about 4 or 5 titles after the
injury.
Again, he's diminished a bit. But Durrant was everything.
I was watching the tackle, Hugh, the other day. I watched it on YouTube the other day. I don't know why it came up. But I watched it and Phil Borsma carries him off.
Yeah.
He doesn't carry him off.
It's a piggyback, isn't it, Al?
And if he doesn't carry him off and they put him on a stretcher, I think there's a better... I don't know if that exacerbated the injury itself. But listen, he was part of a team there that... It's difficult because, I don't know about you, might as well throw this in, how I'm going to get Scotland's Home of the Year in this programme.
Right, okay.
Sometimes I watch these home programmes, you know what you're like, there's something that you've got a weakness for, and I like watching these programmes with my wife, and then they go, and we're giving that an 8. Right? And I go, no, get yourself to. That's never an 8. That house is a midden. Right? or this one should win it. So I'm looking at the Rangers 92-93 team and I'm wondering, do we give it a mark out of 10? Just in the relation to how you... we've got to get to a point where we say, listen, it's either a Rangers team, it's another team that we've come up with, it's a Celtic side, it's a Dundee United, an Aberdeen, or if somebody's got another team that I haven't...
The point is, but there are 4 of us sitting here. It's entirely subjective. We will not come.
Bloody show's about.
We won't come. We're not going to have a clean conclusion here. I would put my money in it.
Well, the reason why I'm saying do we give it a mark is because he said to me, we're not going to get to a conclusion at the end of the show, and I thought, oh yes we are.
Right, okay.
So 92-93 side, for me it was a really good side, and I think of the players there as well. You know, I look at Hateley and I'm thinking, jeez, man.
And remember McCoist was... I don't think...
McCoist would have been injured or something.
Because McCoist and Hateley together, I mean, that's what did Leeds.
Yeah, so...
That basically did them.
Yeah, so I thought Hateley was top drawer. McCoist is McCoist, he's just a legend.
See, can I just go back to Durrant just for a minute?
Yeah.
And, like, see if you go back, or anybody watching this goes back and watches him, and then goes and watches Phil Foden, who everybody goes on about, how he glides across the ground, how he gets beyond the striker, how it's his left foot's an absolute wand. Ian Durrant was doing it 40 years ago. He was.
And I think he was actually more mobile than Foden. It was more driving than Foden. And especially, see the way the game was played there, David, as you know, Souness used to say to him, you've got to sit beside me, or just in front of me. But see, as soon as the ball goes long to Hateley, you've got to be beyond Hateley. See, by the time it hits Hateley in the head, you've got to be careering past them.
I don't know Phil Foden, but certainly I'm going to put my neck out here and say he's certainly Durrant's the funniest. He's the funniest guy I've ever met as well. He was. I mean, if there's Scottish players down through the years that I always think. I mean, I like Douglas because of his humour. It's dry. I love Durrant because it's absolutely top drawer. Danny McGrain could cut you in one line. He'd just boot you into left field with a great line.
Clark, I think, is the driest as well.
Absolutely. So there's lots of players, but I mean, Durrant as a player, magnificent. As a person, even better, funny. So I'm going to give that team 92-93. I'm going to give them an 8.
See, I know you're going to then talk about other teams as well. And
I'm giving myself space.
That's the difficulty with that.
Come on, David. What are you giving them?
7.5.
Oh, 7.5. Right.
Nearly made the Champions League final. That's a harsh marker.
7.5. Right.
I'll definitely give them an 8 because I think there's the guy that we're going to. This programme's going to be tight. There's a guy we've not talked about that. I would say if. I had a word with Walter once about his best Rangers teams and that, who he'd play, and obviously Laudrup's got to be wide left. But he says, my goodness, he says, I honestly, he says, I'm greeting that I can't choose Mikhaylichenko. He says, because Mikhaylichenko is one of the most gifted players he'd ever seen.
Yes, you giving it an 8?
I'm giving him an 8.
I'm giving it an 8.
An 8, okay. The reason why I'm giving it an 8 is because it gives a bit of leeway.
That's why we know it's
you know,
it's not much.
No, it's not much leeway. Yeah, to be fair. So that's one Rangers side. I don't want to go through all of the Rangers sides at the moment. I'll flick, every now and then along with them. So I'm going to switch to Aberdeen 1983 as a contender for the best of the last 40 years. Leighton, Rugby, McLeish, McMaster, Cooper, Strachan, Simpson, Weir, Black and McGee. And you had the kind of Stuart Kennedy, Watson, Hewitt, Gunn and Angus in there as well as of course the ultimate John Hewitt is the super sub, but for me as someone growing up who Celtic and Rangers fans, David, would get on a supporters bus and head up and stop at Stonehaven and go to their mates, wouldn't it be great if we got a draw up here?
That's right.
Because they were so good. And even if Celtic and Rangers were winning at half-time, Fergie's half-time team talk flipped the game on its head, changed everything, because those guys went out and either through fear or through that belief that Fergie and that siege mentality and that everyone's against his mentality, he had them playing out of their skin, and they had so much quality. This, for me, is the ultimate side.
Spoiler alert, that's my team. And that's my team out of all the teams. And it's really unusual because what I did, because I'm an obsessive old Egypt that I haven't even got a telly in my house.
You've only been in a year and a half.
But I sat down and I said, well, out of these teams, who would I pick? Who'd be my subs bench and that? And only one Aberdeen player got in my 11 because I decided to pick a Dundee United back four because I thought that back was it. But that team, for me, I said, was the best. And it's the best for two reasons. I think when people look back at Alex Ferguson for all his great achievements and wondrous achievements, Manchester United, what he did in Aberdeen in the early 80s was unprecedented and has never been repeated. Peter's talking about going up in the supporters bus to Aberdeen. Forget about that, Peter. What Fergie did was Aberdeen teams came down to Ibrox, Parkhead and Hampden and won.
Yeah.
That's what they did. They came down. If you were going along to Celtic Park and Aberdeen visit, oh my God, they're just going to run aggressive, physical, technique. And I think my last word on it, I think the whole thing about these teams, everything in professional football is about winning. Forget aesthetics or anything like that. It's about winning. Win. And they won 2 European trophies, which is 2 more than all the other sides put together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the other key point, it's a great point you make, Hugh, and the reason why I can't see past them is because when you look at the makeup of a side and when we discuss modern day teams and how they've got plan A but some of them haven't got plan B, this team could mix it, they could fight, they had absolute skill, they had players that could actually create something that would beat a man and then create a 2-on-1, and then they had finishers. So if you're looking, you're thinking of all the great managers down through the years, the Bill Shankleys, the Bob Paisleys, the Brian Cloughs, the Jock Stein, Sir Matt Busby, Ferguson totally grasped the fact that spine of steel, sprinkling of gold dust.
Yeah, without doubt. I think I tend to gravitate to what Hugh's saying. I just think the achievements, it's almost like the Lisbon Lions for Celtic. It is like it casts now forevermore. This is the greatest team that we've ever had, and everyone walks in its shadows subsequently. I just think fabled, iconic, a team that an unfancied team. When you think when Aleksey Mikhaylichenko went up, and what you're having to do is change the psychology too around the club, around the team, the belief that you instill, and then to go and win 2 European trophies, it's unimaginable.
Yeah, the favourite of all the players out of them all, and the good goalkeeper as well, and that famed central defensive partnership. For me, Strachan was just the jewel in the crown.
He was absolutely fantastic, and he was surrounded by players that could do what you said earlier on, a bit of everything. You had fantastic players around him, but you also had guys that, again, in the trenches, that's who you'd want beside you, and I just think that was a moment in time that, that Ferguson brought together that team, and they just moulded together perfectly. And the final, like Stuart Kennedy was a terrific right back. He was injured, missed. He'd have played in the final, But you just go right through that team. You think, he would do. And Mark McGee, he was actually for a spell he was one of the finest strikers in Europe. We don't really. I don't know whether it's because McGee had a very up and down managerial career in Scotland and stuff like that. That he's almost like a fun figure, But what a football player he was, They just had right throughout the team. But you're talking about gold dust, and Strachan was one that sprinkled the gold dust.
Yeah, and the other thing about it, let's not forget, just as a little footnote to this, and this is where managers, the difference between good managers and great managers. Alex Ferguson swapped Ian Scanlon for Peter Weir. Ian Scanlon was a brilliant player. Peter Weir was outrageous. He could beat men for fun.
It's always interesting. See if you go to all these sporting dinners or 1-on-1s, and you get Alex Ferguson talking to Dougie Donnelly and all this. And as he's retired, he's become more expansive, Alec, you know, because he's more relaxed about things. And I always remember, there's a few things I remember one night when he was talking, and he became quite aggressive when he was talking about, he says, see Peter Weir on his day, if we had Weir on his day, we could have beaten anybody in the world. And it cast my mind back in this old doddery way that I can't remember where I put my car keys, but I can remember Aberdeen v Ipswich Town.
I knew you were going to say that.
He was playing against a really good world-class fullback, Mills.
Mick Mills.
The right back. And he killed him that day. He killed him. It was like the social work should have come on and said, listen, this is no fair. This is trauma. And you'll just have to, he was, you know, that usual cliche, unplayable. He was just like absurdly unplayable. And Aberdeen had that in their team. But what they were based on was really good, technical, solid ability. I mean, you just have to look at the midfield too. It was Simpson and Cooper. You're not talking about Iniesta and Xavi here. You're talking about guys that's going to allow other guys like the Strachan, Weir to play. I think if you take Strachan, the likes of Weir out, and of course that three at the back, all great players. But like all good teams, they were much better as a sum of the
collective.
Parts. Much better.
But it's a mentality thing as well, isn't it? You know,
coach.
when you see...
It's exactly that. Exactly that.
There was a cup final, wasn't there? Quite a famous one where they won the cup final, and the little guys ran onto the pitch to talk to Fergie. He's fully expecting them to effuse and giving it a brilliant achievement, and he absolutely slaughtered his team while they're running about with the cup.
I actually think he spoke about that not a lot. He said he was quite embarrassed by that.
He is embarrassed.
Because at the time, just where he was in his life at that point, I have a certain kind of standard, and I was still annoyed. I think he was funny on it fairly recently, like he kind of cringing when you look.
But that's the other thing about them. They've got a great camaraderie, because when I was up doing the 40th anniversary, when we all went for a pint at the end of the event, right, everybody was getting bevied, and they said, you know, Strachan was saying that Alex and Willie Miller, you know, went up on an open top unicycle, you know,
because they were the
only two that played. They won it. What was it like? We weren't there, you know, because they were the two golden ones. But nevertheless, that was the kind of a camaraderie. And I did have the good fortune of having Sir Alex one day in a very small gathering, and Alex Mikhaylichenko was there, and you know, and I did that same line about, oh, there's Alex, he won the cup on his own. There was nobody else in his team. And you could see Sir Alex going, no, don't mention that. But I'm going to shock you here. I'm giving them a 10.
I'm on the basis that nobody ever deserves a 10. I'm giving them a 9.
Right.
I will, spoiler alert, it's the team, because of what I've said, it's the best team for me.
Yeah, I'm just wondering whether I should have held this to the end, you know, the best house till the end. What are you giving them?
9.
9?
Aye.
9.5.
9.5. All right, there you go. You just because he started that stupidity. Dundee United, 1983. The one thing of every player that I've had in this studio from Dundee United, they have waxed lyrical about how great some of their performances were, but the manager spoiled it because he was utterly unique. His tactics would not, you know, cut any HR department today, because he was ruthless with a lot of them, and you know, and he had the long-term contracts, the basic but a high bonus if you went on a run of wins, whatever the whole permutation of the success of them. The manager kind of there's a little bit of his tactics and the way he went about his business that sticks in the throat of the players, but there's no doubt about it. He was absolutely top drawer.
None whatsoever. I think that team is on a par with the team that we've just talked about. I think that team might just have won the European Cup. I think
again, another dodgy ref.
No, well, it wasn't. That one was admitted because the Roma. The son of the Roma vice president later came out and admitted that there was a bribe of £50,000, which was a lot of money in those days, to the French referee. But I think that team, 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 I think that I think that team could be revered in the way that the Lisbon Lions were if fate had just fallen on their side, because they could have won the European Cup.
Yeah, it's high praise indeed, and I know some people who of a particular generation will go, oh, come on, give us peace.
No.
That was how good they were.
Yeah.
And if we were talking about the Strackens and the McGees of the world, and the Peter Weirs, for me, they had a genius in Sturrock.
Absolute genius in Sturrock. He was the nearest thing you'll get to Kenny Dalglish for me, and for me, Dalglish. In my career watching football, is the best I've seen in Scotland as a Scottish player, and I've watched the Lions and all that, so, and I watched Baxter and all that, so it's a high benchmark I'm putting here, but I think Dalglish was just so good, and Sturrock was the nearest thing you get to Dalglish. The interesting thing about that team is that I think they'll always be remembered for what they didn't win. Not winning finals at Hampden, not winning UEFA Cup finals, Gothenburg, not getting through, and I know all the palaver about the Roma game, and it was always a feeling about that team that would just come up short, and I always wonder if it was down to the manager, and that sounds really heresy and things like that, but in that extra yard, did they just need a bit of confidence? Did they just need a bit of support? Did they just need a bit of
different kind of
going into it? Because tactically, McLean, if you talk to Alex Ferguson about McLean, I mean, on the death of Jim McLean, Ferguson, not led in any way, came out, and his line was, he's the greatest manager I've faced, the greatest rival I've faced in our opposition dugout, and I include Benitez, Mourinho, Wenger.
Yeah.
He says McLean was the greatest.
Yeah, it's funny you saying that, Hugh, about what was the element that was maybe missing to get them over that final hurdle. It could have been a number of things, but the team, McAlpine, Stark, Malpas, Gough, Hegarty, Neri, Bannon, Milne, Kirkwood, Sturrock and Davy Dodds, and then a very small supporting cast. Some say 14, it was actually maybe 16 or 17 that would come in that season when they would win the league. The ultimate thing though, by winning league, we've mentioned that Sturrock, but Neri was...
Hegarty too.
But Hegarty was great, but Neri was... for me, if you're looking at people who raved about Virgil van Dijk, Neri was so underrated, and they had a wee bit that could mix it as well.
Gough too, coming just early on in his career, the opening sort of foundations of his career. Yeah, I just think when you talk about these times now, if you're a Dundee United fan or an Aberdeen fan, when you talk about where they are now and how the game has changed so much, it feels so seismic. It feels as though you're talking about just different worlds. Obviously, the way the game has changed and progressed, and the way that finances, the impact that finances had, not just in a Scottish football sense, but in a European sense, that this can never ever happen again. Like it's an impossibility for these days to ever be replicated. The way that the system has changed around elite level football and the kind of top five for one in Europe, but then of course the way that Celtic and Rangers have just monetised and dominated the league now. Yeah,
the other thing about it, which you have to take into consideration, even in the 80s, there was a greater pool of players. Yes, England would still take the best of the Scottish players, but there was an even bigger pool still to call on for everybody.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Just you've rattled off that team. I think that is 11 Scots, isn't it?
Yeah.
Team. I think Aberdeen's was also, am I right?
Yep, Scots.
That just tells you everything about how it is a completely different era altogether. It's
unimaginable, but you think if you're a kid now growing up and someone talking about this time, you think these are world class. You've got players in there that were genuinely.
Well, imagine seeing a kid now, you're Joseph, as a young teenager, say that Dundee United team used to treat. Like dug a burst ball with Barcelona.
Yeah. Well, we sat and watched the documentary of the Gothenburg team like that, and Joseph was saying to me, Really? Like, and you're saying, but I remember this. Like, you know, I recall this. Like, this happened. Like,
that team had a longevity as well, though, because there were certain tweaks. Because I think in '87, I think I might be right in saying Billy Thompson might have been the goalkeeper, whereas Swedish McAlpine was.
Well, it's pertinent to mention what you're just saying there, because the team did change a wee bit. Thompson in goal, Malpass, Neri, Hegarty, John Holt,
Jim McInally,
Billy Kirkwood, David Bowman, Eamon Bannon, Ian Sturrock, Paul Sturrock and Ian Redford.
Yeah.
Ian Redford had a brilliant left peg on him as well. So they changed a wee bit, but again, they did
core
get to
for
a
about
final.
4 seasons. The core was there for about 4 seasons, I think. And you know, go back to Miller, McLeish, Hegarty and Neri as well. I mean, it's the cornerstone. It's a foundation. They're fabulous players. And then, I mean, for me, one of my favourite players, Scottish players of all time, is Richard Gough.
Yeah.
And I think Gough was young in the 83 team,
Yeah.
but he was there and obviously learning from 2 of the best and became, in my opinion, the best.
Yeah.
I think the interesting thing about Dundee United was with McLeish and Willem. We'll talk about teams when we've got Butchers and Robertson, Butchers and Gough and etc. to talk about. But I think that back four, as a back four of Gough, Hegarty, Neri and Malpass that's the best. As a back four.
Yeah.
I don't think there's not a question mark over any of those 4 names. And the funny thing, seeing that as well, is like we're talking about old days in Scottish football. If you say to young people nowadays about even young Dundee United fans, I suspect, John Holt, utility player.
Yeah.
Every team needs them.
He was much better
More than that.
Yeah.
Gothenburg final, he was man of the match
Yeah.
against in the 2 legs.
The other
He was
thing,
man of the match.
the other thing I was going to say to you guys, just as we finish on them and mark them out of 10, is when you were throwing up the suggestion that maybe there was something missing from, you know, why they didn't get over the line. I can remember Dundee United playing Celtic at Celtic Park on a rainy, wet Wednesday night, and Jim McLean was interviewed after the game, and the reason it sticks in my head is because Dundee United came down and spanked Celtic,
Right.
and Sturrock was outrageous, and they beat them 3-0, and Jim McLean came out at the end of it and he said, I can't believe this place, he said, we've just battered them 3-0 and their fans have all stayed and applauded us off the park.
Yeah.
He said, if we had their fans, we'd be winning every week. And you just look and you think to yourself, you know, as you pointed out earlier, Dundee United and Aberdeen were coming down and beating Rangers and Celtic.
Aye.
And we, as old fuddy-duddies sometimes are now, we crave those days. We want to see somebody come to Glasgow and have that arrogance and have that ability to go and strut their stuff and say, right, we've got game on here. So I'm a bit reluctant to include, unless you're going to tell me differently, I'm going to get you to mark the 83 side. Unless you're telling me the 87 side was better than them.
I think 83 side because they get to the European Cup semi-finals. Is it again?
That's the team that I actually think is the closest that we have ever had to a team winning a European trophy, apart from the ones that have won it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
I genuinely think that they would have given Liverpool a hell of a game in the final in Rome, but there was no way they were getting to the final because they were playing Roma in the semi-final, with the final being held in Rome. They just weren't getting there.
Yeah.
And I think that team was robbed blind, and that could have been an absolutely iconic Scottish team.
I'm giving them 9.
Yep. I'll give them 9.5.
Right. By the way, and the other great thing about being friends, we can say what we feel. You two are doing my head in. Oh, you're half.
8.75. It's going to go 8.666 recovery.
Yeah.
I think there's just about 8.5 for me.
8.5. Okay, Ali?
9.
9. Okay.
0.1.
Yeah. So, I mean, a right good side. I'll not bother marking the 87 side on that basis.
They're just ignoring the fact that they beat Barcelona. And
Absolutely.
Borussia
I'm not giving up that. Absolutely.
But they couldn't have beat St Mirren in the Scottish Cup final.
Exactly. And you're actually...
Isn't that the story? Isn't that what you say to yourself? What was really going on? Were they just... Because you saw Dundee United at Hampden. You remember they were all sponsored by Bell even, and they used to say, you know, Dundee United, sponsored by Bellhaven, bottled at Hampden. And,
Yeah,
Right.
you're a hard man to bring that back up, aren't you?
and it's true, Dundee United fans of my era will be the first to bring it up, because they say, this isn't the day that you're going down as a Dundee United fan to be a plucky runner-up. This is the day you're going down to beat teams that you really expect to beat, and you don't.
Right, now, this is going to twist this show in the remaining 25 minutes. It's going to take a dramatic twist, and you might be happy, you might not. But on that basis, we've done Dundee United and Aberdeen. Some of us have nailed our colours to the mast on who we think's the ultimate side. We've got a really good Rangers side that we've dissected. I am going to give you the Celtic 2003 side, which has got a dramatic twist because Rangers won the treble.
Nice.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And this Celtic side, for me, if we're talking about that, evolving from when he got there at 2000 and winning the league in 2001 in the treble, they moved on and they had a lifespan. I think there was a 3 to 4 year period where O'Neill had built a side that had plan A, plan B and plan C. And they had so much in their arsenal. And the great thing about O'Neill was not only was he able to spend big, but he inherited genius. Mm-hmm. He had a world-class player in Larsson there, and he'd inherited a Champions League winner in Paul Lambert. Mm-hmm. So he had the makings of it. And then you look at the side, there were weaknesses, or there were people that you thought could have been replaced by somebody better. That's fair. It's the same in every one of the teams we've discussed. So the team is Douglas, Mjällby, Balde, Valharen, Lambert, Agat, Petrov, Lennon, Thompson, Larsson and Sutton, and you could have had McNamara, Maloney and Hartson on there in any one of the substitute positions, or indeed you could have Larsson, Hartson and Sutton at one point on the park. So I think as a collective they were formidable. They could beat you with a set piece, but they could beat you with the genius that they had up front, ably assisted by one of the best twos as a number 9, because Sutton did it with Shearer. And if you've got somebody, Hateley makes it for McCoist, or Hateley does it for Morris Johnston. If you've got somebody who's perfectly matched to you, I'll be the tall guy, I'll win the free kick, I'll lay it off to you. You know, Sutton was there for Larsson. He was.
They're really intelligent football.
They were a smashing team who could do a bit of everything. And you look at the names that you've just rhymed off there, and their midfield was tremendous. Then you've got the magician up front, who does give you a absolute gold dust.
Yeah.
I always felt with that team, if they had a top class goalkeeper, they might just have gone on to a completely different level. Rob Douglas is a decent goalkeeper, but that team's much better than decent, and they didn't have a decent goal. They didn't have a top class goalkeeper.
Yeah, I think Rab himself, when you talk to him, and he'll mention, and rightly so, that he made some big saves in big games. But that point that you make there is not us being disparaging of Rab Douglas. It's talking about levels. And if Celtic had paid particular attention to that level, suddenly you've got a team that may well stop in Celtic fans' minds a Derley, may well stop the genius of Deco and that whole Alenichev in that Porto side. It's all that type of questioning, ifs, buts and maybes, Hugh. But they did have so many different areas where they could win a game.
Yeah, I think funnily enough, for a team that won so much, probably their greatest achievement is defined in defeat. Losing very, very narrowly out of 10 men to a Porto side that won the Champions League the next season. I think that was a really, really high level. They're playing against a really good team with a guy that was already a top coach, that was going on to be one of the certainly the most visible and successful coaches of the 21st century in Mourinho. I think as well, and I had this conversation with young Celtic fans. I was marching up to the stadium in Dortmund the other week there about sometimes how people forget how good teams were. You know, there's recency. We all fall. Young supporters will say, how would Martin O'Neill's team get on against Ange Postecoglou's team, or how would they get on against Brendan's team? And of course, I've got to whisper that. I said, well, Martin O'Neill's team would kill them. You know, I mean, and it's an argument, and my argument is that you've got to place the team in the context. You've got to place the team in some kind of, what are the constant measurements? One of the constant measurements is what they did in Europe, you know, beating Juventus and things like that at home, getting to that final by, you know, beating Liverpool, beating a very good Blackburn team, beating Stuttgart. I mean, really good performances. But the other thing is actually looking at the individuals in the team and saying, again, we talk about the Dundee United and Aberdeens, and there's a wee pattern coming down. Well, all that, you know, many players in Aberdeen and Dundee United team could have played for top 6 English Premier League clubs. And off the top of my head, I would say Martin O'Neill's team, that the 3 forwards, Sutton, Hartson and Larsson, would definitely play for a top 16. Lambert could play for a top 16. Petrov could play for a month. Neil Lennon would be there or thereabouts. And that's before you go to the back 3.
Yeah.
You don't have that nowadays in Scotland. You don't have teams, you know, even at the moment. So, a long-winded way of saying is that they're probably defined because they didn't win a European trophy, but they were a very powerful side.
Yeah. And of course, as we mentioned, in every one of the teams that we've mentioned, it's all been with a manager who was special. And I think that's where that period he was at his absolute peak of his powers, Martin O'Neill.
Yeah, I would probably agree with you. Probably the peak of his side too. You think he'd really built that team across the previous couple of seasons. He'd lost Moravchik, I think, the season before. But he was well in at Celtic by that point. I think Martin would probably have been the most powerful man at the club by 2003. A body of success behind him in Europe was very much the next target. I think you could make a fairly compelling argument to say that 2003 team was the best Celtic team since the Lions.
Yeah, it's a good call on it. They certainly, you know, like Dundee United, like Aberdeen, like that Rangers side, you know, they've taken some good scalps. I'm going to get to a Rangers side that took a few good scalps as well, coming up shortly before we have to do the ultimate twist on this. But I'm going to give them 9.5.
I'll give them 9.
9. Hugh?
8.5.
8.5. You've surprised me there, actually.
I'm going to say 9.5.
9.5. Okay, so we've got to the majority of big sides. Can I just give notable mentions? And then I'm going to focus on a couple that I think rightly you picked out one that I hadn't sent in the list last night to you guys. But if we've mentioned the overall sides that we think are really, really strong, Rangers 9 in a row team. And I'm mentioning the 2 teams here who won 9 in a row initially. Rangers 9 in a row team of Goram, Robertson, Petric, Bjortland, Alberts, Moore, Ian Ferguson, Gascoigne, Laudrup, Durrant, McCoist.
Middle to front, it's sensational.
Oh, jeez.
It really is. You know, I watched a lot of that team and they were a joy to watch at times. But you'll always be hit with the stick that they never did it in Europe.
Yeah.
But
that's where they dropped out of my feel. I just felt as if they were missing something. You know, if anything, if I'm going to be scathing about it, what they were missing was the back 4.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I know that you'll probably have others that you're going to talk about later on, but the fact is that 2 Rangers teams with far less quality than that got to European finals.
Yes.
In reasonably recent times.
And I give you, excuse me, Alexander, Broadfoot, Weir, Queller, Papac, Hemdani, Ferguson, Kevin Thompson, Whittaker, Davis and Darsheville, with subs from Charlie Adam to Christian Daly, Chris Boyd, Nacho Novo and Lee McCulloch.
Which is why in the latter years of Walter's reign, the man was an absolute genius.
Yes.
They got that team, that squad, to a European final.
When you talk about
You've got to
getting a
mention
team
them,
that's
Hugh,
better than the
because
some other parts.
I was at every game commentating all the way to the final, and I mean, they were just outrageous. I mean, because they were just so well organised.
It was the birth of Watanaccio. It was like, it was a really strange campaign. It was my first campaign as a sports journalist. So it's quite recently I've been. That was the first time I was on the road.
Yeah.
And it started really unusual. So I always remember the night in Lyon, where Rangers won 3-0, comfortable. I mean, what the hell did Sam do? But of course, went out. It was a very tough group, and then went on in this incredible run to the final, which I think it's fair to say now was not Walter Smith's priority.
No.
It was, and in fact, there is bits of the run where he was getting quite frustrated, almost.
We're through again.
Oh, he was playing up. He was playing up to it, and it did have its effect at the end of the season. There's no doubt about that. But there was some amazing moments in that thing. I always remember Lisbon. Do you remember Stephen Whittaker doing his Messi?
It was a great move, Hugh.
Yeah.
I remember Panathinaikos as well. And
Novo scored.
Novo scoring late on. The night in Florence where winning in penalties against a really good Fiorentina team as
And it has to be said, Alexander would not have been in there. McGregor was out.
Yeah, he was.
He wouldn't have been the keeper in that final. But it's worth mentioning them. And I'm mentioning the 9-in-a-row team because it was so momentous, and they had genius. Because for me, if we're talking about the best players over the last 40 years, you automatically have Laudrup and Gascoigne in there.
Yeah.
Gascoigne was just world class at one point in his life.
Yeah, I don't think there's no argument about the fact he was world class at a point in his life. Yeah, I think it's a formidable team, but I do think there's a question mark that just hangs over that 9-in-a-row team, just because of the failure to make any kind of impact in Europe.
Well, can I ask you this then? And I'm trying to get a Rangers team that's the definitive for us here. And I've mentioned the 2008, which we all know was a workmanlike, well-organised team, and great credit to their manager. Dick Advocaat's side of 2000, was but there was a point in the Monaco game where you actually thought this Rangers team could go all the way. He's finally got it the way he wants it. They looked really, really strong. Kloss, Perini, Moore, Amoruso, Newman, Ferguson, Alberts, Van Bronckhorst, Claudio Arena, McCann, Moles, Kanchelskis. Mother of God Almighty, it's a bloody good side.
It's an incredible team. Probably again should have done a bit better. And what you're saying about the Monaco game, I always remember, I think that's when Amoruso always claims it wasn't his fault because he lost the ball about 60 yards up the pitch and scored. But if he hadn't suddenly decided he was going to try and be Lionel Messi, that might have been a very different outcome, But that was a great team.
Was it better than the 92-93 side?
I think it's got better quality in it.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
Look at the players.
And I'm going to give you one more team in this equation because we're coming to what I would call the ultimate vote on this, which will piss you three off, but nevertheless, Rangers 2022 side, which I think is rightly added to it because you mentioned it as well. McGregor, Tavernier, Bassey, Goldson, Barisic, Lundstrom, Jack, Aribo, Arfield, Kent and Morelos, with Ramsey, Kamara, Scott Wright and Stephen Davis, substitutes. But that side came within a whisker.
The reason why I mentioned that to you this morning off air when we came in was just because that team went through 17 games to get to a European final. And you look at that team and it's not got the best players out of all the players that we've been talking about here. But some of the results, 4-2 in Dortmund, and we've mentioned some of the players earlier on who played in that game, but also the players that they were up against: Royce, Akanji, Hummels. You can go right through. They got lucky because Haaland never played, but for them to go and do that, for them to beat Leipzig, who were a very, very good team as well, Braga. They came through a section that had Lyon and Sparta Prague in it. They were I thought that was an incredible achievement, Rangers getting to that final and coming within a penalty kick of winning it.
Yes. So the ultimate here is, which one of the Rangers sides is the strongest and gets the vote to go into the ultimate final playoff here? Which one is it? I mean, of the last 40 years, which one is it? Is it, when I look at, we're talking about great quality foreign players. Laudrup was a genius. I loved watching him. Gascoigne was just outrageous. The best of them all for me. But I look, Ian Ferguson was a great player. I think Ian Ferguson's got 10 Premier League medals. He's up there with Gough. There's very few who've got 10. There's an exclusive club.
Cup with someone as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So if it was me picking a team that I thought could mix it with the best, I would pick Dick Advocaat's 2000 side.
I would go with Advocaat's 2000.
I just think that's
I would as well.
Yeah.
I would, because if you were paying money to go and watch a team, that's the team that you would pay money to go and watch, I think.
You've got to look at Advocaat's team and have a big sigh in your heart about quality. You read out the team again, just leave the Dutch guys alone, and you see to yourself, and you don't want to talk about down Scottish football, because I love Scottish football and I go to games every week, and if I wasn't paid to go to a game, and some weeks I'm not, I go to a game. But if you're talking about the quality of the
Moles was a magnificent.
Moles is so
again, it's a Durrant. It's pre-Moles, post-Moles.
Absolutely, and they were absolutely giving Bayern Munich a hell of a time that night when he got injured. And again, things can turn out differently,
Yeah.
That Michael Moles was recommended to Celtic. David Hay had recommended Michael Moles to
Is that right? He was a great player. I'm going to give Dick Advocaat. I think it's the best of the Rangers side. Somebody might think differently, but I think when you mentioned the key word there, look at the quality he had at his disposal. And every time I think of Dick Advocaat's side, I just think of post-match press conference. Because every time I stand in front of a camera, I go, it will be difficult, but we can do it. And that was Dick. He was a good funny man, but a good manager. You don't get as many jobs as he gets without having that quality. I'm going to give them a 9.
I'll give them a 9 as well.
Yep. Hugh?
8.5.
8.5. Ali?
9.
Yeah. Okay. It's an interesting one. Right. I'm going to mention just one other thing here that I think is only pertinent on it all. Celtic's 9-in-a-row team. They had now subsequently they've had a third side, and I'm not being disparaging towards them or dismissive in their achievements. Winning a title is difficult at the best of times, but the circumstances of that third 9 in a row are totally and utterly unique. Not the fault of the Celtic players who played, but there wasn't a Rangers side in there to challenge them. So of the 9 in a row team from 97-98, they had Gould, Stubbs, Reaper, Boyd, McNamara, Annoni, Lambert, Weghorst, Burley, Larsson and Bratback. That was the 97-98, and the 1974 9-in-a-row side was Hunter, McGrain, McNeil, McCluskey, Brogan, Johnston, Murray, David Hay, Kenny Dalglish, Harry Hood and Dixie Deans, who also got to the semi-final of the European Cup and were knocked out in penalties. So I thought it was worthy to give them a mention, but I still think the team, for me, and I mentioned here obviously the invincible side from Celtic of Gordon, Shimonovic, Boyata, Lustig, Tierney, Brown, McGregor, Griffiths, Sinclair, Armstrong and Roberts, if only for the fact that they went 69 games
that has to be mentioned.
So you've got to mention that that Brendan Rodgers side in the equation. I don't think any of them those teams that I've just mentioned of the Celtic teams comes anywhere near O'Neill's side. So I don't think there's any point in marking them. No. Some people might be up in arms and go absolutely tonto, but I think it's right that we mention great Rangers sides, great Celtic sides.
I may have an argument with that with Sydney's team.
The Sydney's team was the one that I was going.
if you sat down and said, I'll give you this about Martin O'Neill's team. If you sat down and said, in the whole entire history of Celtic, you've got to pick 11 to play, just 11 to play. More of the 70s team get into that lineup than Martin O'Neill's team. I think there's 3 from the 70s team are stick-ons to that lineup. Dalglish, Johnston, McGrain.
Yeah, it's a great shout. I mean, absolutely.
And I think the only one that gets out of Martin O'Neill's team is Henry.
I would agree with it.
So are you placing that 19...
I haven't thrown a grenade into it. I'm going to retreat. Keep them level.
Okay. At this point, 18, 19, 28, 36 and a half is... 36 and a half is Celtic's 2003 side. Okay? And if you go up to the other team that we mentioned, Dundee United is 18 and a half, 27 and a half, 36. They're 36, which is the Dundee United side. The Dons, 28, 37 and a half, am I right? Yeah.
I can't see without my books.
28, 37 and a half, which just, I don't think anybody's coming close. I think the Dons for all of us is the best of the sides. And of course, Dick's side is 35 and a half. So it's not a bad shout.
Not much between them all.
There's not much between them, and I think we rightly gave them all the credit they deserve. The only thing that I'm going to ask you now and throw in the equation, it's a semi-final. You've got Dundee United and Aberdeen against the Rangers and the Celtic side. You know, who plays in the final and who wins it? Because I look at those sides and it's mightily difficult, isn't it?
Absolutely, aye.
I mean, who would get into the final? I would suggest to you, Aberdeen are in the final against a Neil Celtic side. You might see differently.
I think you've got to put Aberdeen in the final. The one that would automatically cut out for the reasons, and people might think it'd be really, really harsh, but when you come down to the bottom level of football's about winning. Football's about they always talk about it. Where's your medals? I'd count Dundee United out. They didn't achieve, not even what they could have, what they should have. They didn't achieve.
Yeah.
So they came out. I think Aberdeen were the ones that made the most of everything they had. And that became a template for Ferguson's life. So I would take Aberdeen.
I would slightly disagree with that, because I think when you look at the players that were available in those Rangers and Celtic teams, they should have been winning every week in Scotland. And also, you know, when you've got the likes of your Larsons and Suttons and Petrovs and all that, they should be going far in Europe, as should that Rangers team with the quality that they had.
Yeah.
That Dundee United team, looking at those players, had no right to get anywhere near a European Cup final. And as I say, they came within a nobbled referee of getting there. So I think that Dundee United team should be playing Aberdeen in the final.
It's a good shout. I mean, that's the great joy of it all. And by the way, when I said Aberdeen against the Neil Celtic, I have Aberdeen winning it. And I have Aberdeen winning it because they've got every component right. They've got a better goalkeeper than Celtic's Neil side. They've got a solid back four. They've got genius in the middle, and they've also got goal scorers up front. It would be a 4-3.
I'd love to have seen Paul Lambert trying to stop Gordon Strachan. I think that would have been magnificent.
Oh, would have been, yeah.
That would have been.
Imagine Sutton and Larsson up against Miller and McLeish.
Aye, that's you know.
It's just magic, isn't it? I mean, who are you going for then?
I'm going for Aberdeen.
Aberdeen in the final against
O'Neill Celtic.
And Hugh?
Yeah, I'm going in that, and I would take that as because of physically. Although I must say, you're no dodgy. When you're running out the names of Advocates team, you go.
I know.
For goodness sake.
I know.
Yeah.
I mean, that is just.
Are you going Aberdeen Celtic in the final?
I'm going to.
Are you going Aberdeen to win it or Celtic?
I think Celtic win it because of Larsson.
You're going Aberdeen.
I think Aberdeen just because it didn't. they won.
Yeah.
You know, they've
Yeah.
covered.
It's a
European
fantastic
trophies.
argument. I think of all the, I've thoroughly enjoyed it because I think of all the players in the teams that we've mentioned, they've had the genius, they've had the players that could have been even better had they not been injured.
Well, I made them the best team, but I just think, see, sometimes fights make.
Yeah.
I think Aberdeen were the best team.
Yeah, I also think, ultimately, when you're looking for something to change in the final itself, you need a manager. McLean was a genius. Fergie was in a league of his own.
Yeah.
And he would have worked out a way to try and beat a Neil side, and I think he would, in the end of they've got there. It's a great argument. It's one that we've thoroughly enjoyed. Hopefully you enjoyed this Journos programme. Great to get David, Hugh and Alison's take on it. The great thing for you is you can post in the comments section that the four of us haven't got a clue what we're talking about. You don't even like us, and here's the best team, and you can suggest your own. That's the joy.
They'll be right as well.
That's the joy. That's the joy of every generation when you come to a pub. I really apologise. The only thing we don't have here is 4 pints of lager, and we can all start fighting at the end of it, because this is a classic pub show if ever I've heard one. Great teams. You might want to give us your best team in it. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us for more Journos as we take a wee trip down memory lane and discuss some of the more pressing matters of the 21st century football. From Hugh, from David McCarthy, Alison McConnell and myself, Peter Martin, thanks for listening and watching.